and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to visit these issues in a format that's going to promote discussion and gives us a chance to explore some of the details of the arguments. Sanctuary cities, yes or no? The answer is very clearly no, and I'll be telling you why. Mainly because they're illegal and because they create public safety problems, but also because they don't help in establishing trust between immigrants in the community and authorities. And before I end, I'll also tell you what I think should be done about them. We've heard that sanctuary policies are fine, that they're even necessary, and the reasons that people give for supporting or promoting sanctuary policies are basically one of two reasons, one positive, one negative. The positive reason that's often given is this so-called trust issue. We've all heard it said that if local authorities cooperate with federal immigration authorities, then immigrants in the community, especially illegal immigrants, will be afraid to report crimes because they're afraid that they might then get turned over for deportation. This is something that authorities genuinely should be concerned about if it were true, but it turns out that it's not, and I'll be delving into that a little bit later. The other main reason that you're going to hear about in favor of sanctuary cities is a negative reason, and it's what I call the "you can't make me" argument, that the federal government can't force states to enforce federal law or make them spend their money on it or force local officers to become immigration officers. These don't hold up either upon examination. And cooperation between local authorities and federal authorities is clearly within the constitutional framework of immigration enforcement. So I am going to address these arguments, but first I want to give you the three reasons why I think that the federal government must address the problem of sanctuaries. First of all, sanctuary policies obstruct the legitimate enforcement of immigration laws, and they're illegal. It's important to remember that immigration law is not some obsolete relic of a law that is not worth enforcing. It protects job opportunities for Americans and for legal immigrants, especially those legal workers who don't have a college degree. Their job prospects have not improved whatsoever in the last 10 years, not even close to improving. And these are the Americans and legal workers who are hurt most by illegal immigration, and that needs to be more of a consideration for our policymakers. Also, immigration law protects resources for education, health, and welfare that should be reserved only for citizens and people who are here legally. Illegal immigration is a net fiscal drain on the federal budget to the tune of about $50 billion a year. That's not insignificant. Perhaps most importantly, immigration law enforcement protects the security and safety of our communities, and that's because the main target for deportation is and always has been that small fraction of the illegal alien population who are criminals and who are causing problems in our communities. Since ICE doesn't patrol the streets looking for people to arrest, it depends on local law enforcement to help it identify which illegal aliens are causing the problems. And it turns out that that's who the sanctuaries end up protecting, the criminal aliens. And that's because the most common and most problematic kind of sanctuary policy is one that tells local law enforcement agencies not to cooperate when the feds are trying to remove someone who has been arrested for a state and local crime. 90% of the people being removed by ICE nowadays have a criminal conviction. That's who ICE is targeting, and that's who's protected by sanctuary policies. Congress thought it was so important for immigration enforcement agencies to have this cooperation that they passed a law in 1996 that made sanctuary policies illegal. 8 U.S. Code 1373 says no local government can have a policy that in any way restricts local officials from communicating or exchanging information with the feds, which is exactly what the most egregious sanctuaries do, and that's the exact policy that was in place when the San Francisco Sheriff's Office released the man who later killed Kate Steinle in that now infamous case. In addition, there's 8 U.S. Code 1324, which says that no one may harbor illegal aliens or shield them from detection by federal authorities. So any place that has a sanctuary policy that goes against these laws is not only putting the people of its community at risk, but they are putting themselves at risk for consequences from the federal government. Aside from the legal and constitutional issues, sanctuary policies cause public safety problems. This is because the practical effect is that they end up releasing criminal aliens back to the community who should be deported. Starting in January 2014, when the number of sanctuaries started to proliferate, ICE started keeping track of exactly which jurisdictions were not cooperating. The number of detainers that were rejected because of sanctuary policies, who the subjects of the detainers were, and what happened after they were released. I was able to obtain a copy of this report through a FOIA request, and we posted it on our website, and this is what ICE found. Over that 8-month period that they studied, sanctuaries released about 8,000 individuals who were the subject of an ICE detainer. By June of 2015, it was 17,000. 63% of those who were released already had a serious criminal record, meaning a felony or a violent misdemeanor. Within 8 months, already 23% had reoffended, just within those 8 months. And they were charged with more than 4,000 new crimes. Of those, ICE was only able to rearrest about 40%, and the rest are at large. Now, the sanctuary supporters say they have no responsibility for the problems created by these releases and that ICE should just go arrest them. Easier said than done. If you had to arrest an illegal alien gang member or a drug dealer, where would you rather do it? In the jail where they're already being held on local charges? On the street? In their apartment where you don't know who else is there? Of course not. Forcing ICE to make these arrests in the community is dangerous for the community and for the agents. And it's also upsetting to the public and creates this climate of fear that the immigrant advocates say that they are opposed to. Some say that they understand and deplore the public safety problems created by the sanctuaries, but nevertheless, the sheriffs have no choice but to let the criminal aliens go. And they say that because some courts have ruled that holding the alien for ICE is a civil rights violation. Most sheriffs actually don't agree with that. 90% of them are complying with ICE detainers. And I estimate that about 250 of the more than 300 sanctuaries that exist now fall into this category of erroneously maintaining that they cannot hold someone for ICE. What I say to them is, look, ICE does provide warrants, administrative warrants. They're not required to provide criminal warrants. ICE has offered to pay any additional costs for holding the alien and has established rapid response teams to get officers there quickly to minimize the cost for the local jurisdiction. But there are still some of these places that will not cooperate on any terms. Cook County, Illinois, San Francisco, Contra Costa, and Santa Clara counties in California, and King County in Washington state still do not cooperate, even with all of the accommodations that ICE has offered them. And the reason is, it's not because of legal issues or cost issues. The reason they have the sanctuary policy is because they want to obstruct immigration enforcement because they disagree with it. But the federal government can't just look the other way at this obstruction. So these sanctuary policies are illegal and they are dangerous. To top it off, they do not even accomplish the goal that they allege is their main reason for having them, which is to encourage immigrants to report crimes and to trust authorities. First, there is simply no evidence whatsoever that immigrants report crimes any less than others. Not reporting crimes is a problem in a lot of places, and the reasons are complex. But as I mentioned in the report that we're putting out today, which is available on our website, the national level data on crime reporting show no signs of less reporting of crime by immigrants. The data from a lot of law enforcement agencies that I've looked at shows no sign of a decline in crime reporting by immigrants when there's robust cooperation between the police and ICE, including a very detailed study that was done not far from here in Prince William County, Virginia, a few years ago. There have been some surveys done and reported in the academic literature, and what they've found is that when immigrants are asked if they did not report crimes and what was the reason, What they say is that it's because they faced a language barrier. Or the second reason was that they don't know how to report the crime, or they didn't think what happened to them was a crime, not because they were afraid of being turned over to ICE. So to the extent that there are access problems to police services, then local police should adopt tried and true community policing policies that directly address those problems. Hire officers who speak the languages of the community, have anonymous tip lines, have non-uniform personnel taking crime reports, do outreach to the community to build ties. And most importantly, what they need to do is get the message out that innocent victims and witnesses are never targets for immigration enforcement. That is the message that all of these groups should be spreading, instead of the message that immigrants have something to fear from police. None of the community policing tactics that I mentioned involve suppressing immigration enforcement. So what can be done by the Trump administration to address the sanctuary problem? It's reasonable to expect that this will be a focus for the new administration because the president-elect has said so, and he clearly took to heart the stories of the Americans who've lost family members to crimes by illegal aliens. Addressing the sanctuaries has to be an important part of the Trump administration's plan to boost the deportations of the estimated 2 million criminal aliens who are now in the country. And again, 90% of the jurisdictions are cooperating. It's the 10% who are not, but they happen to be in places that do have a lot of criminal aliens. So the first thing the new administration should do is address the legal concerns of the jurisdictions that make up the majority of the sanctuaries, those 250 that I mentioned. One easy step is to agree to issue administrative warrants where requested. This is not a big deal for ICE. They're going to have to do it anyway in the processing of someone for deportation, so they might as well do it when they issue a detainer and meet those law enforcement agencies halfway, help them out. This is a solution that has allowed Suffolk County on Long Island, which is a big community, has a lot of problems with illegal alien crime. They reversed their sanctuary policy last week, which again I describe in the report. They needed to do this because of a huge problem with MS-13, which has been growing since the arrival of the illegal alien youths from Central America, and hundreds of them have been resettled onto Long Island in those communities. The next thing I would do is, if I were in the Trump administration, would be to begin to publish a weekly list of all of the criminal aliens who are released by the sanctuaries. I would call it Denny's List, after Dennis McCann, who was killed by an illegal alien drunk driver in Chicago in 2011. That illegal alien, his name was Saul Chavez, was one of the first people released under the Cook County sanctuary policy, which is one of the most extreme in the country. And he has never faced charges because he fled to Mexico because Cook County released him because of the newly adopted ordinance that said that they will not turn anyone over to ICE or hold anyone for ICE. That kind of a list would give you folks here at the Press Club something to write about on a weekly basis. There's no question. In addition, the new administration should continue the process that it's already begun to cut federal funds to the sanctuaries. The Department of Justice has recently determined that certain sanctuary policies are inconsistent with federal law, and if you are not complying with federal law, then you cannot receive federal funds. In 2016, the 10 jurisdictions that were identified by the Department of Justice as having a policy that's a problem received $96 million this year that they might end up having to pay back if they don't change their policies by June 30th, 2017. This is not unconstitutional coercion, as some have claimed. It's proper for the federal government to do this if local governments are violating federal law. And it's been done before. And I think that if that there are still, even after taking those steps of meeting the jurisdictions halfway on the legal concerns about warrants and withholding federal funds to the non-compliant jurisdictions, there are still going to be some diehard sanctuary jurisdictions that are going to cling to their policy. If that's the case, then of course the federal government should look at withholding other kinds of grants. But if they persist with these policies, the government is going to have to look at possible litigation to enjoin some of the sanctuary policies, or possibly even prosecution in certain circumstances and selectively, because this continued egregious obstruction of ICE is going to cause more horrific consequences, as we've already seen have happened. And I have to say, if I were a police chief or a sheriff, watching what's going on, observing what's been happening, I certainly would not want to be on the other end of that kind of a case, on the other end of a microphone like this, trying to explain to the family members of the victims or to the citizens in my community why I did not do everything possible to get that person turned over to ICE. And I certainly would not want to deal with the potential legal liability either. So it's going to be interesting to watch this play out over the coming year. And I think right now some of these diehard sanctuary jurisdictions are playing a game of chicken with the federal government. But I'm not sure how long the public is going to tolerate it, and the federal government should not tolerate it either. So thank you very much.
Thank you.